Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I'm Braden. This is Langley Outdoors Academy, and thank you for stopping by. All right, guys, tonight for our main line, we're going to talk about the 5 best lines of the justices in the New York Kerry case that came out in the Supreme Court. This was a slap factory. This was incredible. The conservative justices went to town. Now, I've only picked out my favorite 5 exchanges. Everything else is in the article. It's linked in the description box below. But guys, take in mind, we are quite literally observing history. Throughout the decades that follow this, we're going to look back at this case just like we currently look back at the Heller case. This is going to be a big one, and listen to what the justices said and live in this moment, because this is the moment that the Second Amendment is breathed in us. This is huge, and let's dive in. I want to hear what you guys think, and commit this to memory because this is something special. All right, so number 1, this is from Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. pointed out that constitutional rights do not have to be justified, such as the Second Amendment right to bear arms. The Constitution gives you that right, Roberts said, and if someone's going to take it away from you, they have to justify it. Brian Fletcher, the principal deputy solicitor general arguing in support of the New York law, said, "The whole question is whether the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms confers that right to have a pistol with you for self-defense, even absent a showing of demonstrating need." Roberts responded, "I'm not sure that's right. I mean, regardless of what the right is, it would be surprising to have it depend upon a permit system. You can say that the right is limited in a particular way, just as the First Amendment rights are limited. But the idea that you need a license to exercise the right, I think, is unusual in the context of the Bill of Rights." Slap 1. All right, let's get on to number 2, because Alito, he followed up strong. Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. raised the issue of everyday self-defense on the streets of New York. "Could I explore what that means for ordinary law-abiding citizens who feel they need to carry a firearm for self-defense?" Alito asked. He raised the issue of people who work late in Manhattan, may have to walk through a high-crime area to get home, and are, quote, scared to death. He queried, "They don't get licenses, is that right?" "That is in general right," New York Solicitor General Barbara Underwood said, "if there's nothing particular to them, so if they're not special." "How is that consistent?" Alito responded. "With the core right to self-defense, which is protected by the Second Amendment." This is in the SCOTUS. This is a slap factory, like I said. Here's the second part to this. Underwood answered, "Because the core right to self-defense doesn't, as this court said, doesn't allow for all to be armed for all possible confrontations in all places." Alito goes, "There are a lot of armed people on the streets of New York and in the subways late at night right now, aren't there? All these people with illegal guns, they're on the subway, they're walking around the streets. But the ordinary, hardworking, law-abiding people I mentioned, no, they can't be armed." Slap 2. All right, now let's get in here, because now Kavanaugh's got to make an appearance. Several times Wednesday, Kavanaugh expressed concern about the broad discretion given to government officials to determine which New York residents qualify for licenses to carry guns in public places. He asked the state's lawyer why it was not sufficient for applicants to show, for instance, that they live in high-crime neighborhoods or go jogging at night. "Well, that's the real concern, isn't it, with any constitutional right? If it's the discretion of the individual officer, that seems inconsistent," Kavanaugh said. It's looking good, guys. Kavanaugh pressed Underwood for specific evidence. Same exchange. "It seems like before you impose more restrictions on individual citizens and infringe our constitutional rights based on this theory, you should have to show that those other states that have a lot more accidents, crime, and I don't see any real evidence of that," Kavanaugh said, going to data. Now let's go to, what was that? That was number 2. Let's go to number 3, because here comes Roberts again. This one's great. This is a great one-liner. Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. asked New York Solicitor General Barbara Underwood why New York's understanding of the law makes unrestricted gun permits more readily available in less populated areas. That was an argument they actually said. "Heller relied on the right to defense as a basis for its reading of the Second Amendment," Roberts said. "I would think that arises in more populated areas. If you're out in the woods, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to run into somebody who's going to rob you on the street. On the other hand," Roberts added, "it is more likely that an individual would need a gun for self-defense in places that are more densely populated like cities." This Underwood chick gets just destroyed. Underwood had 2 responses. One, if you go right to history and tradition, the history was to regulate most strenuously in densely populated places. That's what fairs and markets are. So we have history, she said. But we also have a rationale for the history, which is where there's a dense population, there is also a deterrent of lots of people, and there's the availability of law enforcement. Roberts argued that is not always true. And this is the line. It's paradoxical that you say a place is a high crime area, but don't worry about it because there are a lot of police around, he said. So he's now mocking her because she's contradicting herself, the same thing they always do. These regulations are all an effort to accommodate the right to recognize and respect the right to self-defense while regulating it to protect the public safety, Underwood said. The risk of harm from people who are packed shoulder to shoulder, all having guns, are much more acute. So she's saying the population argument again. She noted then that when one is out in the woods, there's a different set of problems relating to self-defense. There's often no law enforcement officer there who could help an individual. But how many muggings take place in a forest? Roberts asked. All right, and now this is the last one. Kavanaugh comes back in strong. Kavanaugh said, a shall issue regime with a typically requirement would be no good in your view, Clement asked, or Clement agreed. The justice said, we should focus on American law and the text of the Constitution, and we don't start the analysis in a vacuum. We started with the text which you say grants the rights to carry, and then historical practice can justify certain kinds of regulations. But the baseline is always the right established in the text. Kavanaugh added that he was concerned about courts placing scrutiny on each test of the law. That would just be a balancing test for that would make it a policy judgment basically for the courts. And I don't know why we would, Kavanaugh said. This was an oral argument full of slaps against the leftist gun control. This was crazy, and I fully recommend you guys check it out. It's in the description box below. And that's what I had for you. The top 5 slaps from the conservative justices against the argument from New York. I cannot wait for like 80 days when we're going to see the answer on this, and I will be here hot off the mic, hot off the press, right when it comes out with you guys. And until tomorrow morning on the Bullet Points, I'm Braden. See you later.